It began with a hole in the ground. It wasn't a grand archaeological dig or a government survey. It was a railway crew, sweating in the summer of 1871, looking for ballast to lay the tracks of a new, ambitious line through the rugged, unforgiving terrain of the Oklahoma Territory. They were building the future, these men, driving steel and timber into the earth to connect the sprawling nation. They wanted stone, hard and unyielding. What they got, instead, was bone. The discovery didn't make the newspapers. It was a local incident, a morbid curiosity for the men on the crew. The foreman, a weathered veteran of the Union Pacific, ordered them to fill the pit back in and move on. There were schedules to keep, and the railroad waited for no man's remains. But the bones kept turning up. Not in a single, neat grave, but scattered, as if the earth had churned them up like autumn leaves. Fragments of ribs, a shattered femur, a skull half crushed, its empty eye socket staring up at the Oklahoma sun. The men grew uneasy. Whispers started. It was an old Indian burial ground, some said. It was the work of bushwhackers from the war, others argued. No one knew for sure. No one wanted to know. They just wanted it to stop. They shifted their digging site a few hundred yards east. For a time, the bones stopped appearing. Then, a worker's shovel struck something that clanged like iron. They dug carefully, their fear now outweighed by a ghoulish curiosity. It was a strongbox, small and blackened with age, its lock rusted and fused shut. It took a hammer and a chisel to crack it open. Inside, wrapped in the remains of oilskin, was a single piece of paper. A letter. The ink was faded, the writing shaky, but the words were still legible. It was a confession. The letter's existence is a matter of historical record, documented in the archives of the Oklahoma Historical Society, though its authenticity has been debated for over a century. The letter was signed by a man named Silas, a Choctaw interpreter named in the 1870 census for the area. The letter confessed to a crime that had been whispered about for years, the murder of a man named Elias Crane, a government surveyor who had vanished without a trace in 1868. No body had ever been found. Silas, the letter claimed, had led Elias into the deep woods and left him for dead. But then came the kicker. The letter didn't end with a lament. It ended with a warning. It ended with a name. The Surveyor's song, it was called by the locals, a dark little rhyme that offered no comfort, only a chilling explanation for the strange things happening in the hills. Asterisk the owl hoots low, the wind does moan asterisk. Asterisk where the surveyor's chain lays his final stone. Asterisk. Asterisk he mapped the land that was not his own asterisk. Asterisk and now he roams where the bones are sown. Asterisk. And then, a final instruction, almost an afterthought, asterisk find the cabin. Burn the map. Asterisk. The foreman, a superstitious man, did just that. He burned the letter, or at least, he claimed he did. But men talk, and the story of the letter and its chilling verse spread through the territory like wildfire, whispered in saloons and around campfires. It became local legend, a ghost story to frighten children and a cautionary tale for men who thought they could own the land. The name Silas, the interpreter, was never spoken of again. It's a story that's been told many times, in many ways. But like most old tales, it got the details wrong. It got the bones wrong, it got the letter wrong, and it got the man, Elias Crane, completely wrong. He wasn't just a surveyor. He was a killer. And Silas wasn't the villain of this piece. He was the man who tried to stop it all. To understand what really happened in those woods in 1868, we have to go back. We have to strip away the legend and face the cold, hard facts of a territory that was still being born, a land of immense promise and immense darkness. A land where a dead man wasn't just a dead man. He was a warning. Elias Crane arrived in the tiny settlement of Cedar Creek in the fall of 1868. He was a tall, gaunt man with deep-set, piercing eyes that seemed to see everything and reveal nothing. He wore a dusty black frock coat, a relic of a more civilized life, and carried a battered leather satchel that held his most prized possessions, a brass surveying transit, a well-worn compass, and a dog-eared copy of the King James Bible. To the people of Cedar Creek, he was a curiosity, a relic of a world they had left behind. He was a government man, sent to map the vast, unclaimed tracts of land that were slowly being opened up for settlement. He was the pen that would draw the lines that would decide the future. Cedar Creek was a raw, brutal place in those years. The Civil War had carved a deep wound through the nation, and its scars were still fresh in the Indian Territory. The 5 civilized tribes, the Cherokee, Chickasaw, Choctaw, Creek, and Seminole, had been forced to walk the trail of tears decades before, and now they faced a new wave of encroachment. They were caught between the promise of freedom and the crushing weight of the American government. The land was a contested space, a simmering cauldron of old grudges and new ambitions. Elias Crane was neither a soldier nor a politician. He was a surveyor, a man of science, or so he claimed. He was a master of a very specific kind of violence, the violence of the map. A map isn't just a picture. It's a weapon. It can erase a history, extinguish a claim, and turn a home into a piece of property. Elias understood this power. He wielded his instrument with the precision of a surgeon, charting the rivers and valleys that would soon be carved into squares and homesteads. He worked alone, preferring the silence of the woods to the company of men. He rented a small cabin on the edge of the settlement, a half-collapsed structure that had been abandoned years before. He paid his rent in silver, not paper, and kept to himself. There was something unsettling about him, a coldness that went beyond mere eccentricity. The local storekeeper, a man named Josiah, remembered the first time Elias came into his shop. He walked in, and the air in the room just seemed to drop a few degrees, Josiah would later recount. He didn't look at me, not really. He looked through me like I was a piece of furniture. He bought a month's worth of provisions, paid in coin, and left without saying a word. I didn't like him. There was a deadness in his eyes. Elias's arrival coincided with the beginning of a series of strange disappearances in the surrounding wilderness. First, it was a lone trapper, a Frenchman named Devereaux, who had a cabin far up in the hills. He was a quiet man, inoffensive, and he simply vanished. His traps were found untouched, his cabin door standing open, his few possessions left behind. Then, a month later, a young Choctaw man named Joseph disappeared while hunting. He was a well-liked boy, a member of a prominent local family. His family searched for weeks, but found nothing. The only sign of him was a single, blood-stained moccasin found near the edge of a steep ravine. The disappearances were blamed on the usual suspects, outlaws, deserters from the war, maybe even renegade Indians. But the fear was palpable. People stopped traveling alone. They kept their children close. The settlement was a place of suspicion. Then came the first night. The singing. It started as a low, mournful hum, barely audible over the crackling of the fireplace. But as the wind picked up, it grew louder, more distinct. It sounded like a song, but with no words, only a strange, haunting melody. It was coming from the woods. Those who heard it said it was the most beautiful and terrifying sound they had ever experienced. It was the sound of sorrow, of longing, of a deep, profound loneliness that seemed to speak to a primal fear in their souls. The next day, a farmer found his best milk cow dead in its pen. There were no signs of a struggle, no marks on the animal. It simply had dropped dead, its eyes wide open in terror. A few days later, a child reported seeing a shape in the trees, a figure that was impossibly tall and thin, standing motionless in the twilight. Elias Crane observed all of this with a detached, almost academic interest. He would listen to the stories at the saloon, his face a mask of careful neutrality. He was the perfect outsider, separate from the fear, the one man who seemed unbothered by the growing terror. He was above it all. But his journals, discovered years later, told a different story. Inside his cabin, hidden beneath a loose floorboard, a leather-bound journal was found. It was filled with precise, detailed entries, topographical notes, weather observations, sketches of trees and geological formations. But among these, there were darker entries, written in a tiny, cramped script. October 12 spoke with the trapper, J. Devereaux. He is a simple man, with simple needs. He claims to have no knowledge of the gold. He is either lying or a fool. I will not be kept from my purpose. Asterisk. Asterisk November 4th. The Choctaw boy, Joseph, was too curious. He saw me measuring the old burial grounds. He asked too many questions. He must be silenced. It is for the greater good. A surveyor cannot be impeded by the superstitions of savages. Asterisk. This was the truth. Elias Crane was not just a surveyor. He was a man hunting a legend. The local stories spoke of an ancient Choctaw treasure, gold that had been hidden during the darkest days of the removal to the west, hidden and cursed by the tribe's spiritual leaders to protect it from the white man. But the entries show a man slowly losing his grip on reality. His writing becomes more erratic, filled with sketches of strange symbols and repeated references to a night chant and a death song. He became convinced that the land itself was trying to stop him. That singing in the woods, the mysterious deaths of animals, the shape in the trees, to him, they were all signs of a hidden enemy, a supernatural guardian he believed he was meant to overcome. Asterisk February 13th. It sings to me. A haunting melody of loss and purpose. It is a warning, but I will not heed it. I see the way now. The song is the map. The voices are the guide. The bones reveal the path. Asterisk. He believed the singing was a form of communication, a map leading him to his prize. It was a paranoid delusion, the madness of a man driven by a greed he could not control. And then, he made a terrible mistake. After the burning of the letter, the foreman of the railway crew did what any man of his time would do, he tried to forget. He had a family to feed, a railroad to build, a country to help heal. The memory of those bones, the feverish confession of a dead man, it was a ghost story, nothing more. But ghost stories, as the saying goes, have a way of coming true. It was the curse of the ridge, as the old Choctaw women called it. A place where the veil between the world of the living and the dead was thin. The bones that had been dug up in 1871? They were real. But they were too small, too scattered to be the remains of a man as large as Elias Crane. The first hint that the story of Elias Crane was more complicated than anyone imagined came a generation later, in 1907, when a young Choctaw farmer named Joseph Fisher was clearing a patch of land on his family's property. This land had been in his family for generations, passed down from his grandfather, who had been a leader of his clan before the removal. He was a proud man, a man who knew the old stories, the ones the white men never bothered to learn. He was the great-grandson of Silas, the interpreter, though the name was spoken only in whispers among his family. It was a name of shame, of tragedy. Joseph Fisher wasn't looking for treasure. He was just a man trying to make a living. He was working his field, turning the stubborn soil with a plow, when the iron blade struck something solid. He bent down, scraping away the dirt, and pulled out a small, iron box. It was a relic, the kind you might use to keep important documents safe from fire. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a bundle of papers. Not a single letter this time, but an entire journal. It was written in English and Choctaw, the handwriting careful and precise. The first entry was dated June 10, 1868. Asterisk, my name is Silas. I have been an interpreter for the United States government for 12 years. I have seen the promises of the whites. I have seen the lying and the thieving. I have seen the ink on their treaties turn into blood on the land. I thought I knew the depth of their evil. I was wrong. Asterisk. It was the discovery of the fisherman, the man who pulled up a box of papers from his field, that set in motion the events that would lead to a final, shocking truth. These papers were not just a confession. They were a chronicle. They told the story of Elias Crane from a very different perspective. The story that unfolded in those pages painted a picture of a man of contradictions. Silas was respected by both his Choctaw community and the white authorities. He could move between two worlds, a translator of words and of customs. He was a man trying to hold his fractured world together. His entries were filled with the mundane details of a man trying to get by in a confusing world, arguments over livestock, pleas for help with legal documents, letters from chiefs struggling to protect their land from a relentless government. But mixed in with the daily frustrations were darker entries, ones that hinted at a growing fear. Silas had met Elias Crane in the late summer of 1868, when the surveyor came to him for help. Elias claimed he needed a guide to map a remote section of the territory, a place called the Devil's Ribbon, a deep, treacherous ravine of steep cliffs and thick, tangled undergrowth. Silas agreed, out of a sense of duty. He suspected Elias was looking for something he had no right to find, but he also knew that the surveyor would go anyway, with or without a guide. He believed that, by accompanying him, he could protect the sacred sites. But his journal reveals a growing unease from the moment they set out. Elias was not a competent woodsman. He was clumsy, stumbling over roots and rocks. He was also obsessed. He constantly questioned Silas about the old stories, the legends. He asked about the singing in the woods, a phenomenon the Choctaw spoke of only in whispers. They called it the Thanulwa Nuklo, the song of the dead. It was a malevolent spirit, a trickster that lured men to their doom. Elias was fascinated. He was convinced it was a real phenomenon, a natural force, perhaps a kind of magnetic resonance in the rocks that he could measure and exploit. Silas tried to warn him. "It is not a song for the living," Silas wrote in his journal. "It is a warning. A death knell. The land here is not a place for a man to be alone with his greed." Silas's entries grew increasingly frantic, describing the effect of the song on Elias. The surveyor's mind, already fragile, seemed to be snapping under the pressure. "I am trapped here with a ghost. He is a pale, sickly thing, a creature of the dead land. His eyes are the eyes of a man who has already chosen his fate. My father was right, the song is real. It sings to the worst part of a man's soul. And he is listening." The journal ends abruptly in the middle of a sentence. He has started digging. He says he has heard the voices telling him where to dig. He is out there now, in the clearing, underneath a gnarled, twisted elm. I can hear him singing to himself. He is Silas didn't finish the thought. He never had the chance. According to the final entry, written in a different, shakier hand, Elias was found dead the next morning, lying face down in the freshly dug hole. He had not found gold. He had found a tangle of ancient bones, the remains of a burial site. Silas wrote, he was mad. Mad with greed, mad with his own importance. He thought he was a god, and the land has struck him down. The earth simply opened up and swallowed him. The official record shows that Elias Crane's body was never found. But his bones? In 1871, they were found. They were found by the railroad crew, who dug them up and filled the hole back in. They were the bones of a man who had been murdered not by another man, but by the land itself. They were the bones of Elias Crane. And that is where the story should end, a cautionary tale. A greedy man, a cursed land, a just demise. But the story of Elias Crane isn't just a tragedy. It's a conspiracy. The story of Silas the interpreter was a cover-up. But the truth is even more horrifying. The bones of Elias Crane were not bones. They were a premonition. Let's go back to the original discovery by the railway crew. The foreman who ordered them to fill in the pit? His name was Josiah. The storekeeper who remembered the coldness in Elias Crane's eyes? His name was also Josiah. The story in the archival records is incomplete because the archives are incomplete. The man who was the storekeeper had a very good reason to remember Elias Crane. He had a very good reason to want him dead. A document found in the records of the land office, buried in an obscure file, changes everything. It's a letter, dated June 15, 1868, a few months before Elias Crane even arrived in Cedar Creek. It's addressed to Elias Crane from a man named Josiah Barrow, his business partner. The letter is about a land deal. Elias and Josiah had a scheme to buy up a huge tract of land for pennies on the dollar, using Elias's surveying skills to find the most valuable parcels and Josiah's knowledge of the territory to work the system. The letter is effusive, optimistic. It ends with a postscript that makes the blood run cold. *P.S. The Indian problem is more acute than anticipated. The local chief, a man named Silas, is proving to be a stubborn obstacle. He has influence and is spreading dissent. He is a dangerous man. Be careful. I will handle it. Elias Crane was not a government surveyor. He was a corporate spy, working for a syndicate of land speculators who wanted to cheat the Choctaw out of their land. He was the thin edge of a very sharp wedge. He wasn't there to map the land for the public good. He was there to find the best way to steal it. The story of Elias Crane was a cover-up. But the truth that had been forgotten was the story of Silas, the interpreter, a man who had been written out of the official history. Silas wasn't a killer. He was a man trying to stop a killing. He was a man trying to preserve his home and his heritage. He was a man who, in the end, was caught between two worlds and destroyed by both. The letter was his final, desperate attempt to set the record straight, to tell the truth. But his truth was more damning than the legend that replaced it. His story was a story of survival, of a man who did what he had to do to protect his community from a threat that was both human and supernatural. A final document discovered in the records of the Bureau of Indian Affairs throws everything into a new and terrifying light. It's an internal memo, dated September 1870, from the Washington, D.C., office of the Bureau to the local Indian agent in Oklahoma Territory. The memo is responding to a report from the Indian agent, which has not been found. The response is standard bureaucratic language, but the subject matter is shocking. The memo confirms the land conspiracy, the plot by Elias Crane and Josiah Barrow. It also reveals that Barrow had a history of violence, with rumors of involvement in a massacre of an Arapaho village in Colorado 10 years earlier. The memo then reveals that Silas had been the man who tipped off the authorities. Silas had, in fact, been an undercover informant for the Bureau of Indian Affairs. He had been tasked with reporting on the activities of white settlers and speculators, and his report on Elias and Josiah was the reason they were being watched. The Bureau's official file, however, didn't end with Elias's death. It ended with a cover-up. The Bureau, in its infinite wisdom, decided to protect Josiah Barrow, the true villain. Barrow was too valuable an asset. He had been cultivating relationships with other tribal leaders, and he was seen as a necessary evil. The Bureau's internal memo concludes, "In the interest of future negotiations, we recommend the official record show that Elias Crane was lost while on a government surveying mission, and that the interpreter, Silas, acted alone. His confession should be treated as the final word on the matter. The other party, Josiah Barrow, is to be considered a cooperative agent for the government and will be granted immunity from prosecution." Silas wasn't just a killer. He was a scapegoat. The man they blamed for the death of Elias Crane, the man whose name became a curse, was in fact a federal informant. Silas, the interpreter, was a hero. He had tried to stop a plot, and in doing so, he had been destroyed by the very people he was trying to help. Josiah Barrow, the true villain, the man who orchestrated the whole scheme, died a wealthy man in 1892, his house filled with Choctaw artifacts and his bank accounts overflowing with money from land he had helped steal. The legend of the surveyor's song lives on to this day. Locals will tell you that if you go to the old ridge at midnight, you can still hear it. The singing. A beautiful, terrible sound that seems to come from the very earth itself. They say it's the ghost of Elias Crane, still searching for his treasure, still luring men to their doom. They say it's the land, weeping for the blood that was spilled. Some say they've seen figures in the mist, a tall, gaunt man in a black coat, watching from the trees. Others speak of a shape that is impossible to describe, a thing of shadow and sorrow, a remnant of a world that was. The official story is a tale of greed and madness. The truth is a story of conspiracy, of betrayal by the very powers that were supposed to protect the land and its people. The bones are still there. The hole the workers dug is still there, overgrown now, hidden by the trees and the thick, persistent undergrowth. A grim monument to a forgotten crime. A reminder that the past is never really past. It's not even past. It's always right there, beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered.